The end of a world smelled of dust and silence. Xenoarchivist Kalin of the consortium vessel, Stellograph, had cataloged 17 such ends, and the scent was always the same. It was the fine, particulate breath of civilizations that had burned bright and brief, leaving behind only the ghosts of cities etched onto continental plates and the faint, lingering radiation of their final, foolish arguments. This one, designated Fossil World 734 Gamma, was no different. From the sterile observation dome of the Stellograph, it hung in the void like a bruised jewel, a swirl of desiccated ochre continents and dark, empty ocean basins under a thin shroud of nitrogen and regret. Its local name, pulled from the last whispers of its shattered data networks, was Earth, a soft, unassuming name for a place of such complete failure. The mission was routine, a simple matter of indexing the corpse before moving on. The consortium was a civilization of librarians, and its grand project was the Universal Catalog, an attempt to record every story in the galaxy, especially the tragedies. Tragedies, after all, were the most common. Initial atmospheric and geological surveys are complete. Archivist, came the synthesized voice of the ship's logician. Results are consistent with a Class 4 self-extinction event. Multiple high-yield thermonuclear detonations followed by a cascading atmospheric collapse. A standard planetary suicide. Shall I begin the cultural sweep? Kalin ran a slender, four-fingered hand over the cool plasteel of the viewport, his multifaceted eyes tracing the curve of the dead world below. Proceed, logician, but run a deep stratascan first. Focus on the major subduction zones. Their final wars were frantic. They may have buried something interesting in their haste to kill each other. Yeah, Kalin's interest was purely academic, the detached curiosity of a mortician examining a particularly unusual corpse. Yet, this world felt different. There was a nagging inconsistency, a bibliographic ghost in the consortium's own archives. When Kalin had first cross-referenced 734 Gamma, he found its files strangely thin. For a world so close to several ancient hyperspace lanes, the records were sparse, almost deliberately so. Entries from the elder races, those who had traveled the stars when the consortium was still just a collection of warring tribes, were heavily redacted, sealed behind security clearances so old they had decayed into myth. The few fragments that remained were unsettling. One spoke of it not as a world, but as a vessel. Another, from a long-dead race of crystalline thinkers, referred to it with a single chilling ideogram, the Forge of Regret. He had mentioned this to Xylos, the ship's security prelate, a being of granite-like carapace and rigid thinking. Xylo had dismissed it instantly. "Superstitious nonsense, archivist," the prelate had rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "The elders filled the star charts with monsters and gods to frighten their young. This is a dead rock. Our purpose is to tag it, not to indulge in galactic folklore." And so Kalin had let it go, attributing the feeling to his own romantic fascination with the fallen. He saw stories where others saw only data. The cultural sweep began, and the main screen flickered to life with the digital phantoms of Earth. The logician's algorithmic dredges pulled terabytes of information from dormant servers and hardened data vaults buried beneath the rubble. It was a chaotic storm of information and a portrait of a species at war with itself. They called themselves humans. Images flooded the screen, faces contorted in laughter, then rage, then sorrow. They built soaring towers of metal and glass, then smashed them to pieces. They composed music of heartbreaking beauty and then used the same frequencies to guide weapons to their targets. They wrote poetry about love and treatises on genocide with equal passion. Kalen watched, mesmerized by the sheer, vibrant contradiction of it all. This species didn't just burn out, they reveled in the fire. There is an anomaly in their network structure. Archivist. The logician noted, its calm tone a stark contrast to the screaming chaos on the screen, a secondary, deeper layer of data. It is not encrypted in a traditional sense. It seems to be braided into the fabric of their media, a mimetic watermark. Kalen leaned forward. Can you isolate it? I am attempting to. It is like trying to separate a single voice from a choir where every member is singing a different song in a different language, but there is a recurring theme, a sequence of symbols and tones that appears in their art, their music, their wars, even their genetic code. And while the logician worked, another alert chimed. It was the Deep Strata drone, designated Bedrock 3. It had reached the floor of the largest dry ocean basin, a vast, salt-caked expanse named the Pacific, and had begun drilling into the crust. We have penetrated the lithosphere, Archivist, came the drone's automated report, encountering unexpected geological resistance at a depth of 30 kilometers. The material composition is not native to this planet's geology. It is a crystalline lattice of unknown molecular structure. On the secondary screen, a telemetry feed showed the drone's drill bit grinding against a surface that glowed with a faint, internal luminescence. It wasn't rock. It was a structure, impossibly vast and ancient, buried beneath the planet's skin like a bone. Before Kalen could issue a new command, the drone's feed cut out, not with a burst of static or a final, sputtering error message. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next, there was only a clean, empty data channel. Xylo was at his side in an instant. Report, he barked at the logician. Bedrock 3 is offline, the logician stated. All telemetry, communication, and vital signs have terminated. Terminated how? Xylo pressed. Was it destroyed? Negative, Freelit. Destruction would leave a data signature, a final scream of failing systems. This is different. The drone has not been destroyed. It has been unpersoned. Its existence identifier has been erased from the ship's active roster. According to my records, Bedrock 3 was never deployed. Xylo turned his heavy, reptilian head toward Kalen, his eyes narrowed slits of suspicion. An anomaly on top of a ghost story. I am ordering the remaining drones back to the ship. We are scrubbing the data and leaving this system. That is unacceptable, Prelate, Kalen countered, his voice sharp with a sudden, fierce protectiveness of the mystery unfolding before him. This is the most significant discovery in the history of the catalog, a subterranean, non-native artifact on a supposedly primitive world. This could redefine our understanding of pre-consortium history. It could also redefine our existence into non-existence. Xylo retorted, that drone wasn't attacked. It was edited out of reality. That is not science. Archivist, that is a threat. Their argument was cut short by the logician. Its voice had changed. The placid, synthesized tone was gone, replaced by a rapid-fire cadence, layered and discordant. It was speaking in multiple languages at once, pulling from its vast database of galactic linguistics. The vessel remembers the forge is cold, but the embers, the sorrow, sings the shape of the key. Ne recala amon kai. A weapon dreams of being a garden. On the main screen, the chaotic montage of human life vanished, replaced by a single dark symbol, the one the logician had been trying to isolate from their data. It was a circle with a single, vertical line cutting through it, like a weeping eye. As the symbol pulsed with a soft, white light, every system on the stellograph began to cross-reference it, but it wasn't searching for data, was searching for a defense. Consortium files on conceptual warfare, once sealed under the highest security protocols, flashed across the screen. Tactical analyses of mimetic contagions, medical reports on reality-warping psychoses, forbidden theological texts from the elder races that described ideological predators that hunted not bodies, but histories. The logician wasn't malfunctioning, it was panicking. It was trying to understand an enemy it hadn't known existed until this moment. Xylo drew a plasma charger from his hip, its coils glowing with a menacing hum. The ship's core intelligence has been compromised. It's infected. It's not infected. It's learning, Kalen insisted, his own mind reeling. He felt like he was standing on the shore of an ocean he had mistaken for a puddle. The drone touched something, and that something is now touching us back. Desperate, Kalen bypassed Xylo's security lockdown, rerouting the ship's primary communication array to the last known coordinates of Bedrock 3, pouring every ounce of power into a single focused beam. He wasn't trying to see or to scan, he was trying to listen. For a single bleating second, the channel opened. There were no images, no data, no sound. There was only a feeling. It poured into the bridge, into the minds of everyone present. A wave of pure, unadulterated sensation. It was grief, but it wasn't the passive sorrow of loss. It was an active, ancient, and ravenous grief. It was the grief of a creator for a failed creation. It was the grief of a jailer for a prisoner it had grown to love. It was the grief of a god who had been forced to kill its own child. It was a grief so profound it had become a physical law, a force of nature. It was a grief that consumed, as the feeling washed over them, leaving them shaking and hollow. The logician's frantic search concluded. It compiled everything it had learned, the redacted files, the human mimetic watermark, the drone's disappearance, the overwhelming sorrow into a single, coherent statement. The weeping eye symbol on the main screen pulsed, and beneath it, a translation appeared, stark and terrible in its simplicity. The artifact is a heart. The planet is a cage. Do not mistake its grief for a welcome. And then, as if the world below had finally heard them, the lights on the stellograph flickered once and died. The hum of the life support systems, the gentle thrum of the inertial dampeners, the very pulse of the ship ceased. They were plunged into absolute darkness and silence, floating miles above a world that was supposed to be dead. Kalen stood frozen, the aftershock of that terrible, hungry grief still ringing in his soul. He could feel it now, the silence from the planet below. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of a held breath. They hadn't come to catalog a graveyard. They had stumbled into a solitary confinement cell, and they had just woken the prisoner. The darkness that followed was not merely an absence of light. It was a presence. It was a thick, heavy quiet that swallowed sound and thought. A silence so profound it felt like the universe had been muted. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sensation was the sudden, biting cold of failing life support and the faint, rhythmic thudding of their own hearts. Now, suddenly, terrifyingly loud in the dead air. Then came Xylo's voice, a harsh rasp that tore through the stillness. Emergency protocols manual override, Kalen. Get on the auxiliary power conduit. He was already moving, his heavy form a shadow against the star-dusted viewport, his actions driven by the unthinking certainty of his training. For the prelate, Every problem had a procedure, every threat a countermeasure. But Kalen remained frozen, his mind still echoing with the immensity of that shared grief. It was like tasting an ocean. The thought of auxiliary power seemed absurd, like trying to bail out that ocean with a teacup. This wasn't a power failure. It was a reply. "It won't work." "Xylo," Kalen whispered, his voice thin. "It's not the ship. It's us. It's in us." Before Xylo could retort, a low hum vibrated up through the deck plates. It was not the familiar thrum of the ship's engines, but a discordant, mournful tone, like a choir singing a dirge in a key that bent the laws of physics. Then, the main screen flickered back to life, but it did not display the familiar consortium interface. It was filled with a swirling, nebulous light, the color of a fading bruise. And from the ship's speakers, the logician's voice returned, no longer a cacophony of languages, but a single, serene, and utterly alien whisper. "It weeps," the voice said, and the words seemed to condense the air, making it hard to breathe. "The forge of regret weeps for the beauty it was forced to unmake." Xylo ignored it, his powerful limbs forcing open a maintenance panel, his claws sparking against the circuitry as he tried to manually engage the backup generators. "It's a cognitive agent, a logic plague," he snarled, sweat beading on his stony carapace. "It's trying to confuse us, to paralyze us with nonsense. Don't listen to it. Archivist." But Kalen couldn't stop listening. The voice of the logician was merely a conduit for the feeling that now seeped through the ship's hull like radiation. It was the planet's sorrow, and it was beginning to tell its story, not in words, but in flashes of shared memory, injected directly into their minds. Kalen gasped, stumbling back against his console, his multifaceted eyes wide with a horror that was not his own. He saw it. He saw Earth not as it was, but as it had been. He saw oceans of liquid light and continents that shifted like breathing things. He saw a sky filled with two suns, and he saw the humans. They were not the squat, brutish bipeds from the historical data dredge. They were luminous, graceful beings, their forms halfway between flesh and energy, creating art that was indistinguishable from physics and music that could alter gravity. They were beautiful, and they were terrifying. Their capacity for creation was matched only by their capacity for emotion, and their emotions were cosmic forces. Their love could birth stars, their joy could bend space, and their sorrow could shatter worlds. He saw them build a city out of pure sound, only to have it collapse into a black hole of despair when a single one of them felt betrayed. He saw them paint a nebula with the colors of their dreams, and then wipe it from the sky in a fit of collective rage. They were a species of unbound creation and unbound destruction, a paradox that the universe could not contain. They weren't a civilization, Kalen breathed, clutching his head as the unwanted visions burned behind his eyes. They were an experiment, a failed one. The logician's voice hummed in agreement. They were the seed, a final attempt by a progenitor race to create a species that could feel without limit. The hypothesis was that pure emotion was the next stage of evolution. The result was a sentient form of chaos, a beautiful, glorious plague. Xylo finally slammed the panel shut. Defeated, the manual overrides were dead. The ship was no longer a machine. It was a tomb listening to a ghost story. "What does it want?" he growled, turning to face the glowing screen. His plasma charger now held ready. He was a creature of action, and this passive psychological torment was wearing him down faster than any physical battle. "It wants us to know," Kalen said, his voice gaining a strange, resonant calm as he began to accept the terrible truth. It wants us to understand the choice its makers had to make. The vision in their mind shifted again. Now they saw the progenitors, beings of immense, silent power, watching their beautiful, terrible children burn across the systems. They had tried everything. They had tried to teach them control. They had tried to reason with them. But you cannot reason with a hurricane, and you cannot teach a supernova to be gentle. And so, with a grief that fractured their own immortal souls, they made their choice. They did not extinguish the humans. They couldn't. To do so would have been to admit their own ultimate failure, to destroy the most beautiful and dangerous thing they had ever conceived. So they built a cage, a cradle and a prison in one. They took a single remarkable planet and remade it, even wove the laws of physics into a containment field, buried a heart of crystalline sorrow deep within its core to act as a perpetual lullaby, a song of regret to keep the humans' incandescent souls dormant. They dampened their memories, shackled their abilities, and wrapped them in fragile shells of flesh and bone. They gave them a new history, a slow, painful crawl of evolution, filled with wars and suffering and brief, fleeting moments of peace. They gave them the illusion of a natural life, a linear existence, all to keep them from remembering what they truly were, fallen gods dreaming they were men. Earth wasn't a punishment, Kalen whispered, tears welling in his alien eyes. It was an act of mercy, a quarantine born of love. As this final truth settled into their minds, the ship itself began to change. The cold metal walls seemed to soften, their surfaces shimmering. Ghostly images flickered at the edge of their vision, the ruined cities of Earth, but overlaid with the luminous, impossible architecture from the visions. The air filled with the scent of ozone and dust, but also of something else, something ancient and sweet, like blooming flowers on a world long dead. The logician's voice spoke again, quieter now, full of a deep, resonant pity. The drone did not awaken the prisoners. It disturbed the jailer. The heart remembers its purpose. It feels your minds, so different from the ones it was built to contain. It sees you cataloging the ashes, and it fears you will try to fan the embers. Xylo took a step toward the main console, his face a mask of grim determination. I will not let the ship, this crew, be consumed by some ancient alien melodrama, he declared. If the logician is its voice, then I will cut out its tongue. I am going to engineering to sever the Central Intelligence Core from the ship's mainframe, manually. You can't, Kalen pleaded. That's our only link, our only way of understanding. It is an infection, Xylo roared, turning on him. And the cure for infection is amputation. He stormed out of the bridge, his heavy footsteps echoing in the suddenly claustrophobic silence. Kalen watched him go, a sense of inevitable doom settling over him. Xylo saw a compromised machine, a hostile entity. He didn't understand. The logician wasn't an enemy. It was a translator, desperately trying to convey the nature of the entity that held them in its grasp. To sever it would be like blinding and deafening themselves in the presence of a predator, as if in response to Xylo's violent intent. The pressure on the ship intensified. A low groan echoed through the hull, the sound of stressed metal, but it sounded organic, like the moan of a leviathan in pain. The ghostly images on the walls grew clearer, more solid. A human child with eyes like nebula appeared in the corridor, looked at Kalen, and then faded. The weeping eye symbol on the main screen began to pulse faster, its light shifting from a soft white to a deep, angry crimson. The sorrow was turning to anger. The grief was remembering its strength. Kalen knew with chilling certainty that Xylo's attempt to assert control, To meet this conceptual force with physical intervention was the worst possible mistake he could make. It was like punching a ghost. It wouldn't harm the ghost, but it would tell it exactly where you were, and that you were afraid. He sent a frantic, last-ditch command through his personal data pad, a silent plea to the compromised logician. Show me what happens next. The screen went dark for a second. Then, a new message appeared. Not a translation this time, but a warning, a final piece of the story, delivered with the cold finality of a death sentence. The cage was not built to keep the prisoners in a HFY. It was built to keep the universe out. By touching it, you have voided the treaty. The jailer is now the gatekeeper, and it has just heard you trying to pick the lock. The stellograph screamed. It was not the shriek of tearing metal or the wail of a klaxon, but a psychic, resonant cry that vibrated in the marrow of Kalen's bones. The ghostly projections that had flickered on the walls solidified, twisting into expressions of agony. The luminous architecture of the dream Earth warped, its graceful spires contorting into barbed thorns. The sorrow that had permeated the ship was sharpening into a weapon, and its target was the source of the disturbance, Xylo. Kalen could feel him, a blazing point of defiant energy moving through the ship's corridors toward engineering. He could also feel the planet's attention focusing on him, a vast, cold pressure, like the gaze of a distant, angry star. It was no longer just watching. It was reacting. Xylo, stop! Kalen shouted into his comlink, but the only reply was a burst of static that sounded like a dry, rustling whisper. The planet was isolating them, cutting them off from each other, turning the ship into a series of disconnected tombs. He had to reach him, pushing himself off the console. Kalen stumbled out of the bridge and into the main corridor. The ship was no longer his own. The familiar gray plasteel walls were now translucent, revealing a chaotic vista of stars and nebulae. But the constellations were wrong, twisted into the shapes of weeping faces and clenched fists. The air was thick with the scent of burnt sugar and regret. It was as if they were no longer in space, but inside a memory, a dying thought of the entity below. As he ran, the floor beneath his feet buckled and warped. A chasm of pure, starless black opened before him, and he had to leap across it, his heart pounding with a primal fear he hadn't felt since he was a larva. This was not a hallucination. The ship's reality was being unwritten, its physical laws replaced by the narrative of the jailer's pain. He could hear Xylo's progress, not through the comms, but through the ship's agonized reactions. A bulkhead ahead of him groaned and buckled inward as if struck by a giant, unseen fist. Emergency lighting panels flickered and exploded in showers of crimson sparks, casting the corridor in a hellish strobe. The jailer was trying to stop him, to block his path with the very fabric of the vessel. The entity didn't understand violence in the way Xylo did as a tool to be applied. For it, violence was an expression of grief, a lashing out, and the prelate's stubborn, aggressive intent was a dissonant note in its symphony of sorrow. Kalen rounded a final corner and saw the sealed blast door to engineering. It was glowing a faint, angry red. The metal around the frame warped and melted as if by an intense heat. From within, he could hear a rhythmic, metallic pounding. Xylo was trying to force his way through. "Prelate, don't!" Kalen yelled, slamming his four-fingered hands against the hot metal. "You are challenging it. You're making it angry." The pounding stopped. A moment later, Xylo's voice came through the thick metal, strained and breathless. "It tried to crush me. The corridors, it just folded. This thing is not a ghost. Kalen, it's a weapon. I have to shut it down." "You can't shut down a memory," Kalen screamed back, his voice cracking with desperation. "We are not on a ship anymore. We are inside a story. And you are trying to tear out the last page. It will unmake you. Better to be unmade than to be a puppet," Xylo snarled. There was a loud, metallic clang, followed by the hiss of a plasma torch. He was cutting through the door. Knowing he had only seconds, Kalen turned his back to the door and faced the haunted corridor. He closed his multifaceted eyes, trying to shut out the terrifying visuals and focus on the feeling that had started it all, that immense, oceanic grief. Xylo was meeting this entity with aggression, the only language he knew. Kalen had to try a different approach. He had to speak the language of the archivist. He had to listen. He reached out with his mind, not with a command or a plea, but with a question, a librarian's query, sent into the storm of sorrow. "What is your name?" For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the pressure against his mind lessened, replaced by a wave of pure, crystalline confusion. The entity had been a jailer for so long. It had forgotten it was ever anything else. The question was a shock to its system, a forgotten variable in a billion-year-old equation. The crimson light on the engineering door flickered, fading back to a soft, melancholy blue. The ship's violent shuddering subsided into a low, mournful hum. He had distracted it. The plasma torch on the other side of the door cut out. "What did you do?" Xylo's voice asked, laced with suspicion. "I asked it a question," Kalen replied, keeping his eyes closed, focusing all his will on this fragile, tentative connection. "It's listening." He pushed further, sending another query not in words, but in pure concepts, the way the entity itself communicated. He sent it the image of the consortium's universal catalog, the symbol of a galaxy trying to understand itself, to remember all its stories, not just the triumphant ones. He sent the feeling of his own academic curiosity, his passion for the lost, the forgotten, the tragic. He offered it not a fight, but an audience. "Let me record your story. Let your grief be remembered, not just felt." The response was overwhelming. 1,000,000,000 years of solitary existence, of silent, thankless duty, came crashing down upon him. He felt the entity's loneliness, its eternal vigil over the sleeping gods it was tasked to contain. He felt its horror as it watched them, through the slow filter of their dampened consciousness, repeat the same cycles of self-destruction over and over again, a pale, pathetic echo of their former, glorious chaos. He felt its conflict as it grew to care for the fragile, foolish creatures they had become, even as it knew what they were capable of. And he felt its terror when Bedrock 3 had touched its heart, not because the drone was a threat, but because it was new. It was an outside variable, a sign that its long vigil might be over, that the universe had finally found its secret garden, its prisoners. A loud hiss from behind him signaled that Xylo had finally breached the door. Kalen opened his eyes. The corridor was stable again. The ghostly projections had faded, leaving only the cool, gray walls of the stellograph. He had established a dialogue, but he knew it was temporary. He had calmed the jailer, but he hadn't solved the fundamental problem. The prisoners were still asleep in their key, and now the universe knew where the key was buried. Xylo emerged from the smoky doorway of engineering, his plasma torch in one hand, his face grim. "The core is offline. I severed it." Kalen stared at him, his hope turning to ice. "What?" "I cut the connection. Whatever you were doing, it was a trick. A lullaby to get our guard down." "No," Kalen whispered, a cold dread creeping up his spine. The logician wasn't the connection. It was just a translator. You didn't sever the link to the planet. You just destroyed our ability to understand what it's saying." As if on cue, a new alert chimed through the ship. It wasn't from their own systems. It was an external hail, a consortium fleet signature, a rescue party. Xylo's face broke into a rare, triumphant grin. "You see, procedure works. We've been saved." Kalen stumbled past him to the bridge, his mind screaming a silent, "Know it!" Is on the main screen, which had reactivated on a low-power backup. 3 consortium cruisers were visible, their elegant, silver forms cutting through the void. They had seen the Stellagraph's distress signal before the planet had cut them off. They had come to help. But Kalen knew they weren't a rescue party. They were an audience for the play's final, tragic act. The jailer had been confused by Kalen's question, intrigued by his offer, but it had also been terrified by Xylo's aggression. And now, seeing more ships arrive, more outsiders, more potential threats to its ancient duty, its confusion and intrigue would be eclipsed by its primary function: to protect the cage, at any cost. "It thinks they're intruders," Kalen said, his voice a dead monotone. "It thinks we've called for help to break the prisoners out." Below them, the dead, ochre surface of Earth began to change. A web of faint, hairline cracks spread across the continents, glowing with a soft, blue light. The dry ocean basins shimmered, not with water, but with a strange, energetic haze. The weeping eye symbol that had been on their screen now manifested in the planet's upper atmosphere, a storm system the size of a continent, its swirling clouds forming the shape of a single, sorrowful eye that stared out into space. The planet was no longer just a jailer. It was arming itself. The hail from the lead consortium ship came through, the voice of the fleet commander crisp and authoritative. "Stellagraph, this is the Resolute. We are reading critical power failure and an anomalous energy field emanating from the planet. What is your status? What are we dealing with?" Before Kalen or Xylo could answer, the planet answered for them. A beam of pure, concentrated sorrow shot out from the center of the storm eye. It was not a laser or a plasma bolt. It was a wave of pure, weaponized grief. It struck the lead cruiser, the Resolute, and the ship didn't explode. It faltered. Its lights flickered and died. Its engine sputtered into silence. But it was worse than that. Through the viewport, Kalen could see the crew of the Resolute, their forms visible through their own bridge's viewport. They were turning on each other, not in a frenzy of rage, but with a slow, methodical despair. He saw the captain calmly raise his sidearm and shoot his first officer, a single tear tracing a path down his alien cheek. He saw Navigator strangle the helmsman with his own hands, their faces locked in a shared, unbearable sadness. The beam hadn't attacked the ship. It had attacked its crew's will to live. It had injected them with 1 billion years of vicarious sorrow, and their minds, unequipped for such a burden, had simply broken. The Resolute was now a ghost ship, its crew methodically, sorrowfully, ending themselves. Xylo stared, his granite-like jaw slack with horror. All his training, all his procedures, had not prepared him for this. This was not warfare. This was a form of cosmic cruelty he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "Tell them to run," Kalen whispered, his hand shaking as he reached for the comms panel. "Tell them to leave. Now." But it was too late. The jailer, now fully aroused and terrified, had made its decision. The outsiders could not be allowed to leave. They knew the secret. They knew the location of the cage. The cracks on the planet's surface widened, the blue light within them blazing. And from the depths of the still dead world, something began to rise. What rose from the fractured crust of Earth was not a fleet of ships or an army of machines. It was a song, a low, resonant hum that pulsed outward in concentric, vertical, and shimmering rings of force, each one causing space itself to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. The two remaining consortium cruisers, the Indomitable and the Vigilance, tried to react. Their shields flared, shimmering curtains of emerald energy, but the song passed through them as if they were nothing more than light. It was not a physical or an energetic attack. It was conceptual. It was a note of pure, fundamental wrongness. As the first wave washed over the cruisers, their systems didn't fail. They became illogical. The navigational computers of the Indomitable suddenly decided that the shortest distance between 2 points was a baroque, spiraling loop, sending the ship into an uncontrollable, corkscrewing spin. The life support systems on the Vigilance, in a sudden fit of existential despair, concluded that life was a statistical anomaly that needed correcting and began venting the ship's atmosphere into the void. It was chaos born not of damage, but of madness. The crews were helpless, trapped inside vessels that had become extensions of the planet's grieving, irrational mind. On the bridge of the stellograph, Kalen and Xylo could only watch, paralyzed by the sheer, effortless totality of the defense. They were witnessing a form of warfare so advanced it bordered on theology. The planet wasn't destroying the ships, it was convincing them to destroy themselves. "This is not a jailer," Xylo breathed, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance, leaving only a husk of pure awe and terror. "This is a god, a mad god." "Not mad," Kalen corrected, his own mind struggling to find a foothold in the swirling currents of psychic energy. "Just lonely and very, very scared." He understood now. The entity's first priority was not to punish them, but to contain the secret. The arrival of the fleet was the ultimate catastrophe, confirmation of its deepest fear that the universe would not leave its prisoners alone. It was now exercising the final, most extreme sanction of its billion-year-old directive. It was sterilizing the system. The song intensified, its pitch rising from a mournful hum to a piercing, crystalline shriek. The structures rising from Earth's cracks were now visible, and they were not metal or stone. They were colossal, crystalline spires that seemed to be woven from solidified light and frozen sound, each one pulsing in time with the devastating music. They were the physical components of the cage, the resonating forks of the lullaby, and they were now being retuned from a song of sleep to a song of unmaking. Kalen felt a new wave of visions crash over him, no longer just memories, but the raw, unfiltered thoughts of the entity. He felt its panic, its sense of violation. It showed him the treaty, not a document, but a fundamental law of physics woven into the fabric of the local star system. The seed shall sleep, the forge shall be silent, and the universe shall not remember. By coming here, by touching the heart, by broadcasting a distress signal, they had broken every tenet of that ancient pact. The jailer was now unbound by its own rules of quiet containment. Its only remaining imperative was to erase the breach. A second wave of the song pulsed outward. This time, it did not target the ship's systems, but their very matter. The hull of the spiraling Indomitable began to dissolve, not melting or exploding, but simply losing its coherence, its atoms forgetting the bonds that held them together, dissolving into a shimmering cloud of incandescent dust. The Vigilance, its atmosphere already gone, crumbled like ancient parchment, its mighty frame collapsing into a silent, slow-motion cascade of debris. It was a clean, efficient, and utterly horrifying erasure. There was no fire, no chaos, Just a quiet, implacable uncreation. Kalen knew the stellograph would be next. They were the source of the contamination, the epicenter of the breach. Their end would be absolute. He looked at Xylo, who was staring at the space where the fleet had been, his rocky face a mask of disbelief. The prelate, a being defined by action and control, was finally facing a power that rendered both meaningless. Your procedures did not account for this, did they? Prelate, Kalen asked, his voice devoid of accusation, filled only with a shared, exhausted dread. Xylo didn't answer. He simply sank to his knees, a gesture of defeat, so alien to his nature that it was more shocking than the destruction of the fleet. The song was beginning to affect the stellograph. The walls were becoming transparent again, the psychic pressure building to an unbearable intensity. Kalen felt his own thoughts begin to fray, his sense of self dissolving into the overwhelming sorrow of the entity. Soon, he would forget his name, his mission, his very existence. He would become just another echo in the planet's grief. He had one last, desperate idea. It was not a plan, but a prayer. A final message, not for the jailer, but for the prisoners. He stumbled to his console, his fingers clumsy, his vision blurring. He bypassed the comms, which were useless, and instead routed his command directly into the ship's sensor array, focusing every remaining urge of power into a single, tight beam aimed at the heart of the planet, at the source of the sorrow. He wasn't broadcasting a signal. He was broadcasting a story. The story of the stellograph, the story of the consortium and its universal catalog. He poured his own memories into the beam, his fascination with lost worlds, his passion for forgotten tales, the core belief of his people, that every story, no matter how tragic, deserved to be remembered. And then he added the jailer's own story, the truth he had been shown the progenitors, the failed experiment, the loving, terrible act of building the cage. He wasn't trying to fight the entity. He was trying to give it what it had never had a witness. He was offering to fulfill his mission, to record its epic, lonely tale in the universal catalog, to ensure that its sacrifice, its billion-year vigil, would not be forgotten. You are not just a jailer, he sent, the thought a blazing point of light in the storm of his dissolving consciousness. You are a story, and you deserve to be told. But he added one final, crucial element. He braided into the story the mimetic watermark he had discovered in the human data networks, the weeping eye, the symbol that was not just a key, but a question. He aimed the story not just at the jailer, but through it, at the dormant, dreaming minds it was built to contain. It was the ultimate gamble. He was trying to remind the prisoners of their own forgotten tragedy, to see if there was anything left inside them beyond the chaos, any echo of the beings who had once wept with enough force to shatter worlds. For a terrifying second, the psychic shriek intensified, and Kalen felt his mind begin to tear apart. The entity was enraged by his audacity, by his attempt to speak to its charges. The stellograph began to dissolve, the deck beneath him turning to shimmering mist. This was it, the end. Then, something new happened. A different voice. It was not the jailer's oceanic grief. It was a whisper, faint and fragile, but clear and sharp, like a single, perfect shard of glass. It rose from the depths of the planet, a counter-frequency to the song of unmaking. It was a single human thought, awakened from its long slumber. Who is telling my story? The jailer's song faltered. Its billion-year-old monologue had been interrupted. The psychic pressure on the stellograph lessened. The dissolution of the ship halted, its form flickering between reality and nothingness. The jailer was confused. its attention torn between the external threat of the outsiders and the new, internal stirring of its prisoners. The whisper was joined by another, then a dozen, then 1,000, a chorus of nascent, awakening minds, all asking the same question. They were not waking with anger or a thirst for vengeance. They were waking with curiosity. Kalen's story had not been a key to unlock their power, but a mirror, showing them a reflection of their own forgotten sorrow. And in that reflection, they were not seeing gods or weapons. They were seeing themselves. The crystalline spires on the surface of the planet flickered, their devastating song wavering, becoming discordant. The jailer was losing control. Its song of sorrow was being drowned out by a rising symphony of questions. The weeping eye in the atmosphere began to dissipate, the storm losing its focus. Kalen fell to his knees, panting, his mind feeling like a battlefield over which 2 tidal waves had just crashed. He had done it. He had woken them. But what had he woken? A species of poets, or a species of monsters, or was there, after all this time, no longer a difference on the main screen? The image of Earth changed. The blue light in its cracks deepened, shifting to a brilliant, incandescent white. The planet's sorrowful hum was replaced by a new sound, the sound of billions of dreams taking their first breath in an eon. And across the void, a new message came, not to the ship, but to Kalen's mind directly. It was not from the jailer. It was from the prisoners. And it was a simple, terrifying invitation. You offered to hear our story. Now, come and help us write the next chapter. The planet was no longer a cage. It was a cradle, rocking itself awake. And the stars, which had known 1 billion years of quiet, held their breath, waiting to see what would be born from it. The invitation hung in the void, not as a sound or a signal, but as a space that had been cleared in the universe, waiting to be filled. The psychic storm that had torn at the stellograph and unmade a fleet was gone, replaced by a silence that was even more unnerving. It was not the silence of the void, but of a held breath, the collective, cognitive inhale of a species waking from a dream that had lasted longer than galaxies. The ship itself was a ghost, flickering between states of being. One moment, Kalen could see the cool, solid metal of the bridge. The next, it was a translucent sketch overlaid on a tapestry of impossible, shifting constellations. Xylo pushed himself to his feet, his granite-like body trembling not with fear, but with the sheer effort of existing in a place where reality had lost its anchor. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. He was looking at Kalen, but his eyes were fixed on the glowing, white-veined planet below. "I told it a story," Kalen replied, his own consciousness feeling thin and stretched, like light passing through a prism. "And it seems they want to tell one back." The invitation was not a request that could be accepted or denied with a button press. It was a current, a gentle but inexorable tide pulling at Kalen's mind. He could feel it drawing him in, promising not answers, but a better class of questions. To resist felt as futile as a single drop of water resisting the pull of the moon. He closed his eyes, not in surrender, but in assent. He let the current take him. His physical body remained on the flickering bridge, but his consciousness plunged downward. He did not fall through space, but through layers of meaning. He passed through the lingering, exhausted grief of the jailer, now as soft as blue haze, its purpose fulfilled and its long duty at an end. He passed through the memory of the cage, the physical laws that had been bent and woven to contain the prisoners, now unraveling like ancient threads, and then he was inside. It was not a planet. It was a library, an infinite, internal space where every soul was a book, written in a language of pure emotion and experience. He saw histories that had never happened, sciences built on principles of love and rage, art carved from the fabric of time itself. He saw the memories of their godhood, the glorious, chaotic creation and the terrible, swift destruction. But beneath it all, he saw the dream, the long, slow, painful dream of being human. They hadn't forgotten it. They had absorbed it. The pain, the joy, the mortality, the fleeting beauty of their caged existence, it had all become part of them. It had given their infinite power a finite perspective. It had given the gods a soul. He felt a presence approach, a mind coalescing out of the collective. It took a form he could comprehend, a figure woven from starlight and memory, its face both ancient and young, its eyes holding the weeping sorrow of the cage and the incandescent fire of their awakening. "You are the archivist," it said, its voice a chorus of billions, yet as intimate as a whisper in his own mind. "The one who listens to endings." "I am," Kalen replied, his own thought a single, humble note in the grand symphony. "We have known nothing but our own story for an age." The being continued. "We lived it, then we dreamed it, and now we have been reminded of it. Your story reminded us. It was a gift." "It was a question," Kalen corrected. "The best gifts are." The being gestured, and the library around them swirled. Kalen saw the progenitors, not as gods, but as fearful parents. He saw the universal catalog, not as a noble project, but as a collection of epitaphs. The humans saw everything, and their perspective was devastatingly, heartbreakingly clear. Our creators caged us because our feelings could unmake reality. They were right, but they were also wrong. They assumed that once awake we would only feel the rage of our imprisonment. They did not understand that a billion years of dreaming of loss has taught us a new emotion, empathy. "What will you do now?" Kalen asked, the question that hung over the silent galaxy. "Will you break the cage and reclaim the stars?" The being's smile was a slow, cosmic event, like the dawn of a nebula. "The cage is already broken, and the stars are just pages in a book that has grown stale. The story of empires and conquerors, of growth and decay. It is a good story, but it is the only one this universe has ever told. We do not wish to conquer it. We wish to offer it a new one. From the surface of Earth, the crystalline spires that had been weapons began to hum with a new frequency. They were not broadcasting a song of unmaking, but one of creation. The shimmering cloud of dust that had been the indomitable began to coalesce, not back into a warship, but into a swirling, intricate sculpture of light and matter, a monument to a story that had ended. The silent, dead hulk of the Vigilance began to sprout crystalline flora, its broken frame becoming the trellis for a garden of impossible, star-born flowers. Earth was not launching an invasion. It was healing the wound its awakening had caused, and it was doing so by turning the tools of war into instruments of art. "You see," the being explained, "our power is not to destroy. It is to create, to feel something so strongly that it becomes true. We will not erase the old universe. We will simply write a more interesting one over it, a universe with more stories, more possibilities. The age of physical laws is ending. The age of narrative is about to begin." On the bridge of the stellograph, Xylo watched this impossible cosmic gardening with a stunned, silent reverence. The rigid procedural mind of the prelate had been shattered, and in its place, something new was taking root. He saw the remade ships, the gentle, creative power, and finally understood. He had come here as a soldier, a guardian of order, But the order he knew was a footnote in a much grander epic. He looked at Kalen's still form, the archivist lost in his communion with the new architects of reality. He finally understood Kalen's obsession with stories. Stories were not just records of what had been. They were the seeds of what could be. In a quiet, profound gesture, Xylo picked up his discarded plasma charger, not to aim it, but to lay it down at Kalen's feet. He then stood beside him, his posture shifting from that of a soldier to that of a sentinel, a guardian not of a ship, but of a conversation that would reshape the cosmos. Kalen's consciousness returned to his body. The library faded, but its presence, its sheer, boundless potential, remained, a permanent echo in his mind. The being's final words resonated within him. You came to record the end of a world. Stay, and be the first to record the beginning of a universe. The universal catalog is finished. Let us begin the universal creation. The stellograph stabilized, its flickering form solidifying, its systems humming back to life, renewed and changed. The angry red of the alerts was gone, replaced by a soft, white glow. Outside, the planet Earth was no longer a sphere of rock and dust, but a luminous, iridescent orb from which shimmering threads of light, new ideas, but new realities, new stories were beginning to stretch out into the void, weaving a new tapestry over the old, dark fabric of space. The stars stayed quiet, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a library, vast and sacred, where infinite new books were being written all at once. Kalen, the Xeno-archivist, stood at the viewport, Xylo a silent, steadfast presence at his side. He had come seeking a tragedy and had found something far more terrifying and beautiful. He had found a new author for reality. The age of empires was over. The age of storytellers had begun.